My name is Sarah, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a quiet suburb of Dallas, Texas, in a cozy two-story house with a white picket fence. To the outside world, my life probably looks perfect. I have a loving husband, Mark, a stable job as a graphic designer, and a close-knit family. We were the envy of our friends, a picture of domestic bliss. Mark, with his charming smile and easygoing nature, always knew how to make me laugh, even when I was stressed about deadlines or family drama. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 5, and I honestly couldn't imagine my life without him. We had built a comfortable life together. Weekends were spent exploring local farmers' markets, trying out new recipes in our well-worn kitchen, or simply cuddling up on the couch to watch a movie. We shared dreams of starting a family, of filling our home with laughter and the pitter-patter of little feet. We were a team, partners in every sense of the word, and I cherished the life we had created. I was particularly close to my aunt, Carol. She was my mother's younger sister, a vibrant woman with a contagious zest for life. Carol had always been there for me, offering advice and support through thick and thin. When I was a teenager navigating the treacherous waters of high school, she was the cool aunt who listened without judgment. When I went through a particularly nasty breakup in college, she was the one who showed up with ice cream and a shoulder to cry on. Carol had always been a free spirit, never settling down in one place for too long. She worked as a travel photographer, jetting off to exotic locations and capturing breathtaking images. Her stories of far-off lands and daring adventures always left me spellbound, sparking a sense of wanderlust within me. But Carol's nomadic lifestyle also meant that we didn't see each other as often as I would have liked. She would pop into town for a few weeks, then disappear again, leaving a void that only her presence could fill. Still, we made an effort to stay connected, talking on the phone or video chatting whenever our schedules allowed. I knew that no matter where she was in the world, she was always just a phone call away. One evening, I received a frantic call from Carol. Her voice was trembling, and I could hear the desperation in her tone. She explained that she had been traveling in South America when she suddenly fell ill. The local doctors suspected a severe case of food poisoning, but they were unable to provide adequate treatment. Carol was weak and vulnerable, and she desperately needed to return home for proper medical care. Without hesitation, I offered to let her stay with us. Mark and I had a spare bedroom, and I knew that she would be much more comfortable recuperating in a familiar environment. Besides, I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone and suffering in a foreign country. Mark, as always, was supportive and understanding. He knew how much Carol meant to me, and he agreed that it was the right thing to do. We made arrangements for her to fly back to Dallas, and I eagerly awaited her arrival, anxious to provide her with the love and care she needed. Little did I know that this act of kindness would soon unravel the carefully woven fabric of my life, exposing a betrayal that would leave me shattered and questioning everything I thought I knew. As I hung up the phone, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. What I didn't know then was that inviting Carol into our home would be the biggest mistake of my life. Carol arrived a few days later, looking frail and exhausted. Her once vibrant eyes were now dull and sunken, and her usually radiant complexion was pale and ashen. I rushed to embrace her, trying to mask my concern behind a reassuring smile. Mark helped her with her luggage, and we settled her into the spare bedroom, making sure she had everything she needed. For the first few days, Carol mostly slept, her body weakened by the illness and the long journey. I took time off work to care for her, bringing her meals, helping her with medication, and simply keeping her company. Mark was also incredibly supportive, running errands, doing chores, and making sure that Carol felt comfortable and welcome. As Carol slowly began to recover, she started to regain her energy and her usual vivacious personality. She would tell us stories about her travels, reminiscing about the exotic places she had visited and the fascinating people she had met. Mark was always attentive and engaged, hanging on her every word. I was grateful to have my aunt back, her laughter filling our home with a sense of warmth and joy. But as the weeks passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started noticing subtle changes in Mark's behavior towards Carol. He seemed to be spending an inordinate amount of time with her, engaging in long conversations that often stretched late into the night. He would bring her flowers, offer her massages, and even start cooking her favorite meals. At first, I dismissed my concerns as mere paranoia. I told myself that I was simply being overly sensitive, that Mark was just being a good host and trying to make Carol feel comfortable. But the nagging feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. I started to notice a certain spark between them, a subtle flirtation that made my stomach churn with unease. They would exchange glances, share private jokes, and their body language seemed to mirror each other in a way that made me feel like an outsider. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Mark with a special dinner. As I unlocked the front door, I heard muffled voices coming from the bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept closer, a sense of dread washing over me. I pressed my ear against the door, and what I heard next shattered my world into a million pieces. It was Mark's voice, soft and intimate, whispering words of affection to Carol. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the same tone he used to use with me, filled with love and desire. Tears welled up in my eyes as I stumbled back, my mind reeling in disbelief. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. It was as if I had walked into a nightmare, a twisted reality that I couldn't escape. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place, unable to move or speak. Finally, I mustered the courage to push the door open, my hands trembling uncontrollably. What I saw next would forever be etched into my memory, a scene of betrayal that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Mark and Carol were in each other's arms, locked in a passionate embrace. Their lips were intertwined, their bodies pressed tightly together. They were so engrossed in their embrace that they didn't even notice me standing there, watching in horror. The world seemed to spin around me as I struggled to process what I was seeing. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted with all my heart, was betraying me with my own aunt, in my own home. The pain was so intense that it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make them feel the same agony that I was experiencing. But I couldn't utter a single word. I simply stood there, paralyzed by shock and disbelief, tears streaming down my face. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. Finally, Mark and Carol pulled apart, their faces flushed with guilt and shame. They stared at me with wide, terrified eyes as if they had been caught in the act of committing the most heinous crime imaginable. And in my eyes they had. Mark was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I can explain," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously between me and Carol. But I didn't want to hear his explanation. I didn't want to hear his lies or his excuses. I had seen enough. The truth was right there, staring me in the face, and it was more than I could bear. I turned and fled from the room, slamming the door behind me. I ran out of the house, not knowing where I was going, but knowing that I had to escape the suffocating weight of their betrayal. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until I could no longer hear their voices calling after me. I ran until I was lost in the darkness, alone and heartbroken, with no idea what the future held. That night, I slept in my car, parked in a deserted parking lot. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the house, the place that had once been my sanctuary, now tainted by their deceit. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but it was all a blur of pain and confusion. How could they do this to me? How could they betray my trust in such a callous and cruel way? I had opened my home to Carol, offering her comfort and support in her time of need, and she had repaid me by sleeping with my husband. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind, a violation of the sacred bond of family and marriage. And Mark, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, the man I had believed loved me unconditionally, had shattered my dreams and destroyed my faith in love. As I sat there in the darkness, consumed by grief and anger, I knew that I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't simply forgive and forget, as if nothing had happened. They had caused me irreparable harm, and they deserved to face the consequences of their actions. A fire began to burn within me, a burning desire for revenge. I would make them pay for what they had done, for the pain they had inflicted upon me. I would show them that I was not someone to be trifled with, that I was strong and resilient, and that I would not let them destroy me. As the sun began to rise, casting a faint glow over the horizon, I made a vow to myself. I would not rest until I had exacted my revenge, until I had made them feel the same pain and humiliation that they had inflicted upon me. But as I plotted my revenge, a small voice inside me whispered a warning. Revenge could be a dangerous game, a slippery slope that could lead to even greater heartbreak and destruction. Was I willing to risk everything, including my own happiness, for the sake of revenge? It was a question that I would grapple with in the days and weeks to come as I carefully planned my next move. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I would not be a victim. I would be a survivor. And I would make them regret the day they ever crossed me. The question was, how far was I willing to go? The next morning, I drove to a nearby motel and checked in under an assumed name. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to exact my revenge without completely destroying myself in the process. I spent the day pacing the small, sterile room, my mind racing with possibilities. I considered confronting them, screaming at them, publicly humiliating them. But those options seemed too simple, too easy. They wouldn't truly suffer unless I devised a plan that would strike at the very core of their being. That would leave them scarred and broken. I knew that I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to be smart, strategic, and patient. I needed to gather information, to understand their weaknesses, to exploit their vulnerabilities. I started by hiring a private investigator. I needed to know everything about Mark and Carol, their habits, their friends, their secrets. I wanted to uncover every dirty little detail that they had tried to hide from me. The investigator was discreet and efficient. Within a few days, he had compiled a comprehensive report on both of them. I learned that Mark had been struggling with financial problems for years, unbeknownst to me. He had racked up a significant amount of debt through gambling and reckless investments. He was desperate to maintain the illusion of success, but he was slowly sinking into a pit of despair. Carol, on the other hand, had a history of infidelity. She had cheated on every partner she had ever been with, leaving a trail of broken hearts in her wake. She was a master manipulator, skilled at charming and deceiving those around her. As I read the reports, I felt a surge of anger and disgust. How could I have been so blind? How could I have failed to see the truth about the people I thought I knew so well? But I also felt a sense of empowerment. Knowledge was power, and I now had the information I needed to strike back. I decided to focus on their weaknesses. I would exploit Mark's financial troubles and Carol's reputation as a cheater. I would use their own flaws against them, turning them into weapons of their own destruction. My first move was to anonymously tip off Mark's creditors about his gambling habit. I provided them with evidence of his reckless spending, hoping to trigger a cascade of financial consequences. I knew that he would be devastated if his carefully constructed facade of success were to crumble. Next, I created a fake social media profile and started spreading rumors about Carol's infidelity. I posted anonymous messages on travel forums and photography websites, hinting at her promiscuous behavior and tarnishing her reputation as a respected artist. I knew that her career was everything to her, and I wanted to see her dreams shattered. As I carried out my plan, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. On one hand, I reveled in the thought of them suffering, of them feeling the same pain that they had inflicted upon me. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sinking to their level, that I was becoming the very thing I despised. I questioned whether revenge was truly worth it, whether it would truly bring me the peace and closure that I so desperately craved. But then I would remember the image of them in each other's arms, the look of betrayal on their faces, and my resolve would harden once again. I couldn't let them win. I had to fight back, even if it meant sacrificing my own moral compass. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to monitor their lives from afar, watching as my plans slowly unfolded. Mark's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. He lost his job, his car was repossessed, and he was forced to sell the house that we had built together. Carol's career also took a hit. Her photography gigs dried up and she was ostracized by her peers. They were both suffering, just as I had wanted them to. But as I watched them crumble, I didn't feel the sense of triumph that I had expected. Instead, I felt a deep sense of emptiness, a void that revenge couldn't fill. I realized that hurting them wouldn't heal my wounds. It wouldn't bring back the love and trust that they had stolen from me. It wouldn't make me whole again. I had become so consumed by my desire for revenge that I had lost sight of what truly mattered. I had forgotten about my own happiness, my own well-being. I had allowed their actions to define me, to control me, to consume me. As I sat alone in my motel room, contemplating the wreckage of my life, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could continue down this path of destruction, allowing revenge to consume me until there was nothing left. Or I could choose to let go, to forgive, to move on with my life. The decision was not easy. Letting go of my anger and resentment felt like admitting defeat, like letting them get away with their betrayal. But I knew that it was the only way to truly heal, to find peace, to reclaim my life. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I would abandon my plan for revenge. I would forgive Mark and Carol, not for their sake, but for my own. I would release myself from the shackles of anger and resentment, and I would focus on rebuilding my life, on finding happiness and fulfillment on my own terms. It was a difficult and painful process, but it was also incredibly liberating. As I started to let go of my anger, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in months. I realized that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive this heartbreak and emerge even more resilient than before. I checked out of the motel and drove back to my old neighborhood. I found an apartment in a quiet complex, a fresh start, a blank canvas upon which to paint my new life. I started therapy, talking through my feelings with a compassionate and experienced therapist. I reconnected with old friends, rediscovering the joy of laughter and companionship. I pursued my passions, dedicating myself to my work as a graphic designer and exploring new creative outlets. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. I learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in myself again. I realized that my happiness didn't depend on Mark or Carol or on anyone else. It was something that I had to create for myself, from within. And as I embraced my new life, I realized that I had finally found the peace and closure that I had been searching for. But just when I thought I had left the past behind, an unexpected twist would bring me face to face with Mark and Carol once again, forcing me to confront the consequences of my actions and to make a final decision about my future. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to Carol's wedding. The groom's name was Mark. I stared at the invitation in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. They were getting married, after everything that had happened. The audacity of it was staggering. Part of me wanted to throw the invitation in the trash and pretend that I had never received it. But another part of me was intrigued, curious to see what kind of life they had built together after destroying mine. I wrestled with the decision for days, torn between my desire to move on and my lingering resentment. Finally, I decided to attend the wedding. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, that it would dredge up painful memories and emotions. But I also knew that I needed to face them, to see them with my own eyes, to finally put the past behind me. The wedding was held at a small chapel in a nearby town. As I walked inside, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. I saw some of my relatives, people who had once been close to me but who had drifted away after the scandal. They greeted me with cautious smiles, unsure of how to react to my presence. And then I saw them. Mark and Carol were standing at the altar, holding hands. Mark looked gaunt to ND Chinese letter, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Carol, on the other hand, looked radiant and confident, her eyes sparkling with a hint of defiance. As I watched them exchange vows, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for them. They had found each other in the midst of betrayal and heartbreak, and they were now trying to build a life together on a foundation of lies and deceit. I wondered if they were truly happy or if they were simply clinging to each other out of desperation. After the ceremony, I approached them. They looked surprised to see me, their faces a mixture of shock and unease. "Congratulations," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I wish you both the best." Mark stammered, "Sarah, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry for everything." Carol simply glared at me, her eyes filled with hostility. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I just wanted to see for myself," I replied. "To see if you were truly happy and to let you know that I forgive you." Their faces softened slightly, their eyes widening in surprise. You forgive us?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I need to move on with my life. I can't let your actions define me any longer." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. As I drove home, I felt a sense of peace and closure that I had never thought possible. I had finally confronted my demons, and I had emerged victorious. I had forgiven them, not for their sake, but for my own. And in doing so, I had freed myself from the shackles of anger and resentment, allowing myself to finally move on with my life. A few years later, I met a wonderful man named David. He was kind, compassionate, and supportive. He loved me for who I was, flaws and all. We got married and started a family. We had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl. My life was filled with love, laughter, and happiness. And as I looked at my family, I knew that I had finally found my happy ending. But as I tucked my children into bed one night, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Had I truly forgiven Mark and Carol? Or was there still a part of me that harbored resentment, a part of me that longed for revenge? The answer would come to me in the most unexpected way, forcing me to confront the darkness that still lingered within my heart. One day, I received a call from Mark. His voice was weak and desperate. He told me that Carol had left him. She had run off with another man, leaving him heartbroken and alone. He had lost his job, his house, and now his wife. He had nowhere to turn. He begged me to help him, to offer him a place to stay. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down and tell him to go to hell. But another part of me felt a flicker of compassion for him. He was a broken man, a shell of his former self. And despite everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to abandon him completely. I told him that I would think about it. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, my mind racing. Could I really forgive him? Could I really bring myself to help the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way? I talked to David about it. He listened patiently, without judgment. He told me that it was my decision and that he would support me no matter what I chose. After much soul-searching, I decided to offer Mark a place to stay. I knew that it was a risky decision, that it could potentially disrupt my peaceful life. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do. I called Mark back and told him that he could come and stay with us for a while. He was overjoyed, his voice filled with gratitude. He arrived a few days later, looking even worse than I had imagined. He was thin and haggard, his eyes filled with despair. I welcomed him into our home, trying to put aside my past resentments. David was also incredibly welcoming, treating Mark with kindness and respect. For the first few weeks, Mark mostly kept to himself. He spent his days looking for a job and attending therapy sessions. He seemed genuinely remorseful for his past actions, and he expressed his gratitude for our help. As time went on, Mark started to open up to us. He shared his struggles with depression and anxiety. He talked about his regrets and his hopes for the future. I listened patiently, offering him support and encouragement. Slowly but surely, Mark began to heal. He found a new job, made some new friends, and started to rebuild his life. He was still haunted by his past, but he was determined to move forward. As I watched Mark's transformation, I realized that I had finally found true forgiveness. I had not only forgiven him for what he had done, but I had also helped him to heal and to find redemption. And in doing so, I had freed myself from the last vestiges of anger and resentment. One evening, Mark came to me with tears in his eyes. He thanked me for everything that I had done for him. He said that I had saved his life, and that he would never forget my kindness. He told me that he was finally ready to move on, to start a new chapter in his life. He had decided to move to another state, to be closer to his family, and to start a new business. I wished him well, and we said our goodbyes. As I watched him drive away, I felt a sense of closure. I had finally put the past behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. I had learned that revenge was not the answer, that forgiveness was the only path to true healing. And I had discovered that even in the darkest of times, it was possible to find hope, redemption, and ultimately happiness. My journey had been long and difficult, but it had taught me valuable lessons about love, loss, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit. And as I looked at my family, my husband, and my children, I knew that I had finally found my place in the world, a place of peace, love, and happiness. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally shining on my life once again. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. David and I built a beautiful life together, filled with the joys and challenges of raising a family. My career flourished, and I found fulfillment in my work. But even with all the happiness in my life, there was still a nagging feeling that I couldn't quite shake. It was a sense of unease, a subtle premonition that something was about to disrupt my carefully constructed world. One sunny afternoon, as I was picking up my children from school, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. It was Carol. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of emotions washed over me. Surprise, anger, and a strange sense of curiosity all mingled together. I hadn't seen Carol in years, not since her disastrous marriage to Mark ended. I had heard rumors that she had moved to another state, that she was trying to start a new life. But here she was, back in Dallas, standing just a few feet away from me. She looked different, older and more worn. Her once vibrant eyes were now clouded with sadness, and her usually flawless complexion was marred by wrinkles and sunspots. She was dressed in simple clothes, a far cry from the designer outfits she used to wear. As I watched her, I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing here. Had she come to apologize? Had she come to seek forgiveness? Or had she come to stir up trouble once again? I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to approach her. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend that I hadn't seen her. But another part of me was drawn to her, compelled to confront her and to finally get some answers. I took a deep breath and started walking towards her. As I got closer, I could see the recognition dawn in her eyes. Her face paled and she took a step back as if she wanted to run away. But it was too late. I was already standing in front of her. "Carol," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It's been a long time." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. "Sarah," she whispered, I didn't expect to see you here. What are you doing in Dallas?" I asked. "I thought you moved away." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I came back to see my mother," she said. "She's been sick." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised by my own sincerity. "How is she?" "She's not doing well," Carol said, her voice trembling. "The doctors don't think she has much time left." I nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy for her. Despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She had lost everything, her husband, her career, and now her mother. She was all alone in the world. "I'm sorry," I said again. "Is there anything I can do?" Carol looked at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. "You want to help me?" she asked. "After everything I've done to you?" "I've forgiven you, Carol," I said. "That doesn't mean I've forgotten, but I'm willing to put the past behind us. If you need help, I'm here for you." Carol started to cry, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Sarah," she sobbed. "Thank you so much." I reached out and took her hand, offering her a comforting squeeze. "Come on," I said. "Let's go get some coffee and talk." As we sat in the coffee shop, Carol told me about her life over the past few years. She had struggled to find work, she had battled depression, and she had alienated most of her friends and family. She admitted that she had made a lot of mistakes, and that she regretted her affair with Mark more than anything in the world. She said that she had finally realized how much she had hurt me, and that she was truly sorry for her actions. I listened patiently, offering her words of comfort and support. I didn't excuse her behavior, but I tried to understand her perspective. I realized that she was a deeply flawed person, but she was also capable of remorse and change. As we talked, I felt a shift in my own perspective. I had come to the coffee shop expecting to confront her, to accuse her, to make her pay for her sins. But instead, I found myself offering her forgiveness and compassion. I realized that I had finally let go of my anger and resentment, that I had truly moved on from the past. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of peace and contentment. I had faced my demons, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient than before. But little did I know that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter that would test my faith and my resolve in ways that I could never have imagined. A few weeks later, I received another phone call from Carol. Her voice was frantic, and I could hear the desperation in her tone. She told me that her mother had taken a turn for the worse, and that she was in the hospital, clinging to life. She begged me to come and visit her, to say goodbye before it was too late. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to get involved. Part of me wanted to stay away to avoid the emotional turmoil, but another part of me felt a sense of obligation, a sense of compassion for Carol and her dying mother. I decided to go to the hospital. When I arrived, I found Carol sitting by her mother's bedside, holding her hand. Her mother was frail and weak, her face pale and gaunt. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored. Carol looked up as I entered the room, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," she whispered. "It means a lot to me." I nodded and sat down next to her. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Carol's mother struggle to breathe. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with sadness and grief. Finally, Carol's mother opened her eyes. She looked at Carol, her lips forming a weak smile. "Carol," she whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." "I'm here, Mom," Carol said, her voice trembling. "I'm not going anywhere." Her mother looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Who's this?" she asked. "Mom, this is Sarah," Carol said. "She's a friend of mine." Her mother looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Sarah," she said, "I know that name. You're Mark's wife, aren't you?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't expected her to remember me, not after all these years. "I used to be," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her mother looked at me, her eyes filled with anger and resentment. "You ruined my daughter's life," she said. You took away her happiness. You're a terrible person. I was stunned, unable to respond. Carol tried to intervene, but her mother waved her away. Don't defend her, Carol, she said. She doesn't deserve it. She's a snake in the grass. I stood up, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe that she would say such things to me, especially at a time like this. I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll just leave. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Carol and her mother behind. As I walked out of the hospital, I felt a wave of anger and resentment wash over me. I had tried to be kind, to be compassionate, to offer forgiveness, but it was never enough. Some people were just determined to hold onto their anger and their bitterness. I vowed to never again get involved in Carol's life or in the lives of her family. They were toxic, and they would only bring me pain and misery. I would focus on my own family, on my own happiness. I would leave the past behind, and I would never look back. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a mistake. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was abandoning Carol in her time of need. I knew that her mother's words had been hurtful, but I also knew that she was dying, and that she was probably not thinking clearly. I started to wonder if I should go back to the hospital to offer Carol my support, but I hesitated. I was afraid of being rejected again, of being subjected to more anger and abuse. As I wrestled with my conscience, I realized that I had reached a crossroads. I could choose to be bitter and resentful, to hold on to my anger and to let it consume me. Or I could choose to be kind and compassionate, to offer forgiveness and to let go of the past. The choice was mine, and the consequences would determine the course of my life. What would I do? My heart ached. I thought about my children. How would I want them to act in a similar situation? What kind of example would I want to set? I knew what I had to do. I turned the car around and drove back to the hospital. When I arrived, I found Carol standing outside her mother's room, crying. She looked up as I approached, her eyes filled with surprise. Sarah, she said, what are you doing here? I thought you left. I did, I said, but I couldn't stay away. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for what happened. Your mother was just upset and she didn't mean to hurt me. Carol nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, she said. She's been saying a lot of things lately. She's scared and she's angry. I understand, I said. Can I see her? Carol hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay, she said, but be prepared, she's not in a good mood. We walked back into the room and I approached Carol's mother's bedside. She looked at me, her eyes still filled with anger. What do you want? She asked. I just wanted to tell you that I forgive you, I said. I know you're going through a lot and I don't want to add to your burden. I hope you can find peace before you go. Her mother looked at me, her eyes softening slightly. You forgive me? She asked. After everything I said? Yes, I said. I forgive you. Her mother closed her eyes and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. I stood there for a few more minutes, holding her hand. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Carol and her mother behind. I never saw Carol's mother again. She died a few days later, surrounded by her family. I attended the funeral, offering Carol my condolences. We didn't talk much, but I could see that she appreciated my presence. As I left the funeral, I felt a sense of closure. I had finally made peace with the past, and I was ready to move on with my life. I knew that I would never forget what had happened, but I wouldn't let it define me. I would focus on the present, on my family, on my happiness. I would cherish every moment, and I would never take anything for granted. But as I drove home, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. It was David. His voice was strained, and I could tell that something was wrong. Sarah, he said, I need you to come home right away. There's been an accident. My heart sank. What happened? I asked, my voice trembling. It's the kids, he said. They were in a car accident there at the hospital. I gasped, my mind reeling. How bad is it? I asked. I don't know, he said. Just come to the hospital as soon as you can. I hung up the phone and sped towards the hospital, my mind filled with fear and dread. I couldn't imagine what I would do if something happened to my children. They were my whole world, my reason for living. As I arrived at the hospital, I saw David pacing back and forth in the waiting room. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with worry. I ran to him and threw my arms around him. What happened? I asked, my voice shaking. They were hit by a drunk driver, he said. They were on their way home from soccer practice. How are they? I asked. The doctors are still examining them, he said. They said they have some serious injuries. We sat in the waiting room for what felt like an eternity, waiting for news about our children. Finally, a doctor came out to talk to us. He looked grim. I'm sorry to tell you this, he said, but your son is in critical condition. He has a severe head injury, and we're not sure if he's going to make it. I gasped, my heart shattering into a million pieces. And my daughter? I asked. She's in stable condition, he said. She has some broken bones and a concussion, but she's going to be okay. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of dread. My son was dying. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. We rushed to his bedside, and I held his hand, praying for a miracle. He was unconscious, his face pale and bruised. He was hooked up to machines that were keeping him alive. I sat there for hours, talking to him, telling him how much I loved him, begging him to fight. But he didn't respond. As I sat there, watching my son struggle for his life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and resentment. I was angry at the drunk driver who had caused this tragedy. I was angry at the world for being so unfair. And I was angry at myself for not being able to protect my children. I knew that I had to find a way to cope with my anger, to channel it into something positive. I couldn't let it consume me, or it would destroy me. I decided to focus on my daughter, to be there for her, to help her heal. She needed me now more than ever. I also decided to start a foundation to raise awareness about drunk driving. I wanted to prevent other families from experiencing the pain and suffering that we were going through. As the days turned into weeks, my son remained in critical condition. The doctors told us that there was very little hope, but we refused to give up. We continued to pray, to hope, to believe in a miracle. But then, one day, the doctors told us that there was nothing more they could do. His brain was too damaged, and he would never recover. They asked us if we wanted to take him off life support. It was the hardest decision of my life. After much agonizing, we decided to let him go. We held him in our arms as they disconnected the machines, and we watched as he took his last breath. He was gone. My son was gone. My heart was broken. In the days and weeks that followed, I struggled to cope with my grief. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop crying. I felt like my life was over. But then I remembered my daughter. She needed me. I had to be strong for her. I started to focus on her recovery, on helping her heal both physically and emotionally. She was a brave and resilient girl, and she inspired me with her strength. Together, we began to rebuild our lives. We joined a support group for families who had lost loved ones to drunk driving. We found comfort and understanding in sharing our stories with others. We also continued to work on the foundation, raising money and awareness to prevent future tragedies. As time went on, I began to heal. The pain never went away completely, but it became easier to bear. I learned to live with my grief, to honor my son's memory, and to find joy in the present. I also learned the importance of forgiveness. I knew that I could never forgive the drunk driver who had killed my son, but I could forgive myself for not being able to protect him. I realized that I had done everything I could, and that I had to let go of the guilt and the self-blame. As I continued on my healing journey, I received an unexpected visitor. It was the drunk driver who had killed my son. He had been released from prison, and he wanted to apologize. I was hesitant to meet with him. I didn't know if I could face him without exploding with anger, but I decided to give him a chance. When he arrived, he was a broken man. He was filled with remorse and regret. He told me that he had been struggling with alcoholism for years, and that he had never meant to hurt anyone. He said that he was truly sorry for what he had done, and that he would carry the guilt for the rest of his life. As I listened to him, I felt a flicker of compassion. I realized that he was also a victim of his own addiction. I knew that I could never forgive him for what he had done, but I could offer him my understanding. I told him that I hoped he would use his experience to help others, to prevent them from making the same mistake. He thanked me, and we parted ways. I never saw him again. As I reflected on my journey, I realized that I had come full circle. I had started out seeking revenge, but I had ended up finding forgiveness. I had learned that revenge only leads to more pain and suffering, while forgiveness offers the possibility of healing and redemption. I had also learned that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, it is possible to find hope, strength, and resilience. My life would never be the same, but I was determined to make the most of it. I would honor my son's memory by living a life filled with love, compassion, and purpose. I would continue to work on the foundation, to make the world a safer place for others. And I would cherish every moment with my family, knowing that life is precious and that every day is a gift. But even as I embraced my new life, there was still one question that lingered in my mind. Had I truly forgiven Mark and Carol? Or was there still a part of me that harbored resentment, a part of me that longed for closure? The answer would come to me in the most unexpected way, forcing me to confront my past and to make a final decision about my future. Years passed. The foundation flourished, and I found solace in helping others. My daughter grew into a strong, compassionate woman. David remained my rock, my constant source of love and support. We built a beautiful life, a testament to our resilience and our ability to overcome adversity. But the memory of Mark and Carol still lingered in the back of my mind, a faint echo of a past that I had tried so hard to bury. One crisp autumn evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received a letter. The return address was unfamiliar, but something about the handwriting tugged at my memory. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. It was from Mark. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he had moved away to start a new life. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to read it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend that it didn't exist. But another part of me was curious, compelled to know what he had to say. I took a deep breath and began to read. He wrote about his life, about the challenges and the triumphs he had experienced. He had started a small business, and he was finally achieving some success. He had also found love again, and he was happily married. He wrote about his regrets, about the pain he had caused me, and about the lessons he had learned. He apologized for his actions, for the betrayal, for the heartache. He said that he understood if I could never forgive him, but he hoped that I could find some peace knowing that he was truly sorry. As I read his words, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, and a surprising sense of compassion all mingled together. I realized that he had changed, that he had grown, that he had learned from his mistakes. He was no longer the man who had betrayed me. He was a different person, a better person. I finished reading the letter and sat there in silence, contemplating his words. I realized that I had finally forgiven him, not just in my head, but in my heart. I had let go of the anger, the resentment, the bitterness. I had found peace. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to know about Carol. I needed to know if she had found happiness, if she had found redemption. I decided to write to Mark to ask him about her. A few weeks later, I received a response. He told me that Carol was living in a small town in Arizona. She was working as a waitress, and she was struggling to make ends meet. She had never found love again, and she was lonely and isolated. He said that she had been diagnosed with a serious illness and that she was not doing well. As I read his words, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She had made a lot of mistakes, and she had paid a heavy price. I decided to visit her. I booked a flight to Arizona, and I drove to the small town where she was living. I found her working at a diner, her face etched with weariness and sadness. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening in surprise. "Sarah," she said, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see you," I said. "I heard you weren't doing well." She sighed and nodded. "I'm not," she said. "I'm sick and I'm alone." "I'm sorry," I said. "Can I sit down?" She nodded, and I sat down across from her. We sat in silence for a few minutes, then I spoke. "I wanted to tell you that I forgive you," I said. "For everything, for the affair, for the lies, for the pain." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "You forgive me?" she asked. "After everything I did?" "Yes," I said. "I forgive you. I've learned that holding on to anger only hurts me. I want to let it go. I want to move on." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. "Thank you so much. You don't know how much that means to me." We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our regrets, our hopes. I learned that she had finally realized the error of her ways, that she had finally come to terms with her past. She was no longer the manipulative, selfish woman I had once known. She was a different person, a more humble, more compassionate person. As I prepared to leave, I hugged her. "I hope you find peace, Carol," I said. "I hope you find happiness." She smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. "You've given me the greatest gift I could ever ask for. You've given me forgiveness." I left the diner and drove away, feeling a sense of closure that I had never thought possible. I had finally made peace with the past, and I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. I had learned that forgiveness is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It is the key to healing, to redemption, and to finding true happiness. I returned home to my family, to my husband, to my daughter. I hugged them tightly, cherishing every moment. I knew that life was precious, and that every day was a gift. I had overcome adversity, I had found forgiveness, and I had built a beautiful life. And as I looked to the future, I knew that I was ready for whatever challenges may come my way. I was strong, I was resilient, and I was at peace. But even as I embraced my happiness, there was still one lingering question that I couldn't shake. Had I truly made the right choices? Had I truly found the best possible outcome? Or was there still a part of me that wondered what might have been? The answer would come to me in the most unexpected way, in a twist of fate that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and forgiveness. One sunny morning, as I was volunteering at a local charity, I met a young woman. Her name was Emily, and she was a kind, compassionate soul. We struck up a conversation, and I learned that she was a social worker, dedicated to helping underprivileged children. As we talked, I noticed something familiar about her. There was something about her eyes, her smile, her mannerisms that reminded me of someone I knew. I couldn't quite place it, but the feeling persisted. A few days later, Emily invited me to her apartment for dinner. I accepted, eager to get to know her better. As I sat in her living room, admiring her artwork, I noticed a photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of a young woman, smiling brightly. I recognized her instantly. It was Carol. My heart skipped a beat. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emily smiled. "That's my mother," she said. "Her name is Carol." I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. Emily was Carol's daughter. I had never known that Carol had a child. "Your mother," I said, my voice barely audible. "Yes," Emily said. "She's a wonderful woman. I love her very much." I sat there in silence, trying to process the information. It was too much to take in. Emily was Carol's daughter, and I had no idea. I knew your mother," I said, my voice shaking. "We were friends a long time ago." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew my mother?" she asked. "How?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain. "It's a long story," I said. "We were close, but then something happened and we drifted apart." Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What happened?" she asked. I took a deep breath and began to tell her the story. I told her about Mark, about the affair, about the betrayal. I told her about the pain, the anger, and the forgiveness. I told her about my journey, about my struggles, and about my triumphs. As I spoke, Emily listened intently, her eyes filled with compassion. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, then she spoke. "I had no idea," she said. "I knew that my mother had made some mistakes in her life, but I never knew the extent of it." I nodded, understanding her shock. "It was a long time ago," I said. "We've both moved on, we've both found peace." Emily smiled. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I'm proud of my mother. She's overcome a lot and she's become a better person because of it." I smiled back. "I am too," I said. "She's a remarkable woman." As we continued to talk, I realized that I had found something special in Emily. I had found a connection to my past, a connection to Carol, and a connection to a future that I had never imagined. I knew that our relationship would be complicated, but I was willing to take the risk. I was willing to embrace the unknown. I had learned that life is full of surprises, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I knew that I had found a new friend, a new confidant, and a new member of my family. My journey had come full circle. I had started out seeking revenge, but I had ended up finding forgiveness, healing, and ultimately, love. And as I walked out of Emily's apartment, I knew that my life was complete. I had everything I needed, and I was ready for whatever the future may hold. The end. Or was it? As I drove home, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if Emily wasn't who she seemed to be? What if she was part of a larger plan, a scheme to exact revenge on me for the pain I had caused Carol? The thought was unsettling, and I couldn't shake it. I decided to do some digging, to investigate Emily's background. What I discovered would change everything once again, and would force me to confront the darkness that still lingered within my heart. But that is a story for another time.